Today we're tackling a really tough but absolutely critical question. What would a modern nuclear conflict actually look like from a scientific standpoint? We're going to break down the entire chain of events, from the geopolitical spark all the way to the planetary consequences.
So let's just dive right in with the question that's probably on your mind. How close are we?
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the geopolitical flashpoint. Then, we'll zoom way into the physics of the actual explosion. From there, we'll go microscopic and see the biological damage. And finally, we'll zoom all the way out to see the long-term global fallout.
All right, first up, let's look at the big picture. Because honestly, to get the science, you first have to understand what could possibly trigger it. We're not just talking about proxy wars anymore, not by a long shot. The tension between nations like Iran and Israel has boiled over into direct strikes, and that just changes the whole game. Each side has these red lines, and when that breakout time shrinks, well, the pressure on those lines becomes immense.
And this timeline, wow, it really lays out just how fast this has all happened. After the US pulled out of the nuclear deal back in 2018, Iran started systematically cranking its program back up. But the really critical moment was April 2021. That's when they started enriching uranium to 60%. I mean, technically speaking, that's a huge leap, putting them uncomfortably close to the 90% you need for a weapon.
And all of this, it just creates a totally new reality. Iran now has the material for several bombs, okay? But here's the real kicker. They have knowledge, and you can't unlearn knowledge. Even if a new deal were signed tomorrow, the know-how they've picked up with these advanced centrifuges, well, that permanently shrinks any future breakout time. That cat is out of the bag.
And this all points to a huge diplomatic deadline, October 2025. That's when the so-called snapback mechanism is set to expire. That's the tool that lets UN partners quickly bring back international sanctions against Iran. Once that's gone, a massive piece of leverage just vanishes, which puts incredible pressure on everyone to figure something out before that window slams shut, maybe for good.
But what if diplomacy fails? What happens then? This is where we shift completely, from geopolitics to pure physics. If a weapon is ever used, what happens in that first tiny fraction of a second? We're literally zooming in from the situation room all the way down to the atom.
Okay, so there are three things that happen right away, and they are all just devastating. You have a flash of heat that moves at the speed of light. You have a physical shock wave that just obliterates everything. And then you have this silent, invisible pulse that could fry the technology of an entire continent. Let's dig into each one.
So first up is that thermal flash. Its power is all about a basic rule of physics, the inverse square law. What that basically means is if you double your distance from the blast, you don't get half the energy, you get a quarter of it. It's this law that makes survival a brutal, unforgiving function of how far away you are.
All right, next up is the blast wave itself. We call the force it carries overpressure. And this isn't just wind, okay? It's a literal wall of air that's been compressed. And believe me, it does not take much. An overpressure of just half a pound per square inch, just half a PSI, is enough to start shattering windows and causing real damage.
This all declassified diagram is actually perfect. It shows you exactly how that wall of force just fizzles out. You can see that peak, the sharp spike of overpressure, getting smaller and smaller as the wave moves outward. All that destructive energy literally just runs out of steam as it travels.
But then there's a third effect, and this one is kind of sneaky. If a nuke goes off at a really high altitude, it won't make a crater or a fireball on the ground. No, it does something else entirely. It unleashes an invisible, silent strike against our modern world, an electromagnetic pulse.
It's this really bizarre chain reaction that happens way up in the sky. Gamma rays from the detonation shoot down and literally knock electrons loose from air molecules. Then, the Earth's own magnetic field grabs these free electrons and starts spinning them, creating this giant, invisible electrical generator in the atmosphere. And that generator unleashes a massive wave of electromagnetic energy that fries power grids and electronics for thousands of miles in every direction.
Okay, so for anyone who actually survives that initial blast, a whole new war is just beginning. And this one is fought inside their own bodies. We're going from physics down to biology, from the macro of the blast wave to the micro of the human cell.
Here's what you really need to get. Ionizing radiation is basically microscopic shrapnel. It blasts through your cells and, as you can see here, it just shreds your DNA. It causes these catastrophic breaks in the genetic code, the very instructions that tell your cells how to live, how to divide, how to do anything.
And this damage at the cellular level, it leads to this truly terrifying part of acute radiation syndrome that they call the walking ghost phase. For hours, sometimes even days, a person can feel okay, maybe a little sick, but functional. But it's a complete, horrifying illusion, because on the inside, their core systems, their bone marrow, their gut lining, are collapsing. Their cells are just dying off because they've lost the ability to replicate.
All right, for our last piece, let's pull the camera all the way back out. I mean, way out. Because beyond the blast, beyond the radiation sickness, there is one final, planetary scale consequence. An effect that shows the biggest killer might not even be the bomb, but the world it creates in its wake.
You know, the best way to understand what happens next isn't to think about another weapon. It's to think about a natural disaster, like a supervolcano. At the end of the day, both events do the same thing. They throw incredible amounts of soot and ash high up into the stratosphere, where it just hangs there, blocking the sun on a global scale.
As author Brian Walsh puts it, this isn't just a tough winter we're talking about. This is a fundamental climate shift. The soot from all the burning cities would just sit up there in the high atmosphere, dimming the sun and creating a kind of twilight that could last for years.
And just to put some numbers on this, back in 1815, the massive eruption of Mount Tambora led to the year without a summer. It dropped global temperatures by about 2.7 degrees Celsius. But look at the models. Even a limited, so-called regional nuclear war could cause a temperature drop that's more than twice as bad.
And here it is, the final, cruelest twist in this whole thing. The biggest killer, on a global scale, wouldn't be the blast, it wouldn't even be the radiation, it would be starvation. That collapse in temperature and sunlight would trigger a complete, catastrophic failure of agriculture, everywhere. It's famine that becomes the real killer.
You know, there's this great quote from the historian Will Durant. He said, "Civilization exists by geological consent, subject to change without notice." He was talking about things like volcanoes and asteroids. But man, it fits perfectly here. We have actually built a man-made force that can revoke that consent, that can trigger a geological level disaster all by ourselves.
Look, the science here is crystal clear. The chain of events, from the physics of the blast to the biology of the cell to the climate of the entire planet, it's all terrifyingly straightforward. So the question isn't what would happen. We know what would happen. The only real question is, are we going to choose to let it happen?